The old farmhouse stood alone, a solitary figure at the end of a long winding dirt road. Its weathered facade and broken windows told tales of neglect and abandonment. A silhouette against the grey sky, it seemed almost like a ghost from another time, a relic of a bygone era. Emma pulled up, dust swirling around her car, creating a hazy curtain that momentarily obscured her view of the house. It was always easier to see the dust than it was to see the house, as if the house itself was trying to hide from the world. Despite its dilapidated state, the farmhouse had a strange allure, an almost magnetic pull that drew Emma in. Maybe it was the way the sunlight hit the overgrown garden, casting long shadows that danced in the breeze. Or perhaps it was the way the wind seemed to whisper through the willow tree in the yard, its branches swaying gently as if waving hello. Whatever it was, Emma felt a sense of belonging. She was home. She stepped out of her car, taking in the sight and smell of the countryside, a stark contrast to the hustle and bustle of city life. The air was crisp and clean, filled with the scent of pine and damp earth, a refreshing change from the polluted air she was used to. It was a far cry from her tiny apartment in the city with its cramped spaces and constant noise. Here there was space to breathe, to think, to dream. The air was fresh, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth, a reminder of the natural beauty that surrounded her. As she approached the porch, a floorboard creaked under her weight. She smiled, a sense of nostalgia washing over her. This old house had stories to tell, and she was eager to listen. This old house had stories to tell, secrets hidden within its walls, waiting to be discovered. Emma had always been drawn to the mystery of old houses, their character and charm, the sense of history that seemed to seep from every crack and crevice. She loved imagining the lives lived within their walls, the laughter and the sorrows they had witnessed, the generations that had come and gone. This farmhouse, with its peeling paint and crooked porch swing, was no different. It had a story to tell, and Emma was determined to uncover it. She had purchased the property for a steal, ignoring the warnings from locals about strange occurrences in the house. To her, it was just an old house in need of some love and care. Emma, a pragmatist at heart, dismissed their tales as mere superstition. She didn't believe in ghosts or haunted houses. To her, it was all just folklore. She didn't believe in ghosts, at least not yet. But as she stood there, staring at the old farmhouse, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The house seemed to be alive, its creaks and groans like whispers in the wind. Emma took a deep breath, steeling herself for the journey ahead. She had a lot of work to do, but she was ready. This was her new beginning, her chance to start over, and she was determined to make the most of it. With a determined stride, she walked towards the farmhouse, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. This was her home now, and she was ready to make it her own. She inserted the key into the rusty lock, turning it with a sense of anticipation. The door creaked open, revealing the dark, musty interior of the house. Dust motes floated in the air, illuminated by the sunlight streaming through the dirty windows. The house was old and neglected, but it had potential. Emma could see it, even if no one else could. She walked through the rooms, her footsteps echoing in the empty space. Each room held a promise, a glimpse of what could be. She could already picture the transformations she would make, the life she would breathe into this old house. As she brushed the dust off an old piece of furniture, she felt a sense of connection to the past. This house had a history, and she was now a part of it. Standing in the middle of the empty room, Emma felt a surge of determination. This was her home now, and she was ready to make it her own. The farmhouse on Whispering Pines Road was no longer just a house. It was her future.
You sure about this, dear?
Haunted? By what?
The whispers, dear. They say you can hear them at night. Whispers in the walls.
Just the wind, I'm sure.
Mrs. Gunderson, a kindly old woman with eyes that held ancient wisdom, peered at Emma over a plate of freshly baked cookies. Her kitchen was warm and inviting, filled with the comforting aroma of chocolate and vanilla. The walls were adorned with old photographs and trinkets, each telling a story of its own. Emma had stopped by for a chat and, more importantly, to try Mrs. Gunderson's legendary chocolate chip cookies. She had heard so much about them from the locals, who swore by their magical ability to lift spirits and bring comfort. Mrs. Gunderson's voice was barely a whisper, but it sent a shiver down Emma's spine. "The whispers, dear," she repeated, her eyes narrowing as if she could see the very spirits she spoke of. Emma tried to sound skeptical, but there was a tremor in her voice she couldn't quite disguise. "It's probably just the wind," she said, though she wasn't entirely convinced herself. Mrs. Gunderson leaned in, her voice even lower. "The wind doesn't whisper names, Emma. It doesn't call out to you in the dead of night." Emma chuckled nervously, trying to shake off the eerie feeling that had settled over her. Mrs. Gunderson didn't reply, but her silence spoke volumes. Her eyes, filled with a mix of sorrow and understanding, seemed to say more than words ever could. Emma left soon after, her arms laden with cookies and her mind filled with unsettling thoughts. The sun had set, and the once warm and inviting countryside now seemed cloaked in shadows and mystery. The wind had picked up outside, and as she drove home, she could have sworn she heard a faint whispering sound coming from the old farmhouse. The road ahead was dark and winding, and the trees seemed to whisper secrets of their own. Emma's grip on the steering wheel tightened as she tried to focus on the road, but her mind kept drifting back to Mrs. Gunderson's words. She turned on the radio to distract herself, but all she got was static. The white noise only added to the eerie atmosphere, making her feel even more uneasy. She switched it off and drove in silence, the only sound being the howling wind and the occasional creak of the car. Emma glanced at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something or someone behind her. But there was nothing, just the empty road stretching out into the darkness. She let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding and tried to calm her racing heart. As she neared the old farmhouse, the whispers seemed to grow louder, almost as if they were calling out to her. She sped up, eager to get past it and back to the safety of her own home. But the whispers lingered in her mind, refusing to be silenced. Finally, she arrived home, parking her car and quickly making her way to the front door. She fumbled with her keys, her hands shaking slightly, and hurried inside. The warmth and familiarity of her home did little to ease her unease. She placed the cookies on the kitchen counter and stood there for a moment, lost in thought. The whispers, the old farmhouse, Mrs. Gunderson's words, they all swirled in her mind, creating a storm of doubt and fear. Emma walked over to the window and peered out into the night. The wind howled, and the trees swayed, casting eerie shadows on the ground. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that the whispers were still following her. She closed the curtains and turned off the lights, hoping that a good night's sleep would help clear her mind. But as she lay in bed, the whispers echoed in her ears, a haunting reminder of the old farmhouse and the secrets it held. Emma closed her eyes, but sleep didn't come easily. The whispers seemed to grow louder in the silence of the night, filling her mind with questions and fears. She tossed and turned, unable to escape the eerie feeling that had taken hold of her. The moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting shadows on the walls. Emma stared at the ceiling, her mind racing. She knew she had to find out the truth about the whispers, about the old farmhouse. But for now, all she could do was wait for the dawn, hoping that the light of day would bring some clarity to the mysteries of the night. The first few days in the farmhouse were peaceful. The air was crisp and the mornings were filled with the songs of birds welcoming the new day. The farmhouse, with its rustic charm, seemed like the perfect escape from the hustle and bustle of city life. Emma spent her time unpacking and exploring the property. Each room held a piece of history, and she marveled at the craftsmanship of the old wooden beams and the intricate details of the vintage furniture. The yard was expansive, with wildflowers dotting the landscape and a gentle brook running along the edge of the property. She found an old tire swing hanging from the willow tree and spent an afternoon swaying gently, feeling like a child again. The swing creaked softly with each movement, and she closed her eyes, letting the gentle breeze carry her worries away. It was a moment of pure bliss, a reminder of simpler times. But as the sun began to set each day, a sense of unease settled over her. The long shadows cast by the setting sun seemed to stretch and twist in unnatural ways, and the once welcoming farmhouse took on a more sinister appearance. The vibrant colours of the day faded into the deep blues and purples of twilight, and the air grew colder. Night came, and with it the sounds. The farmhouse, which had been so full of life during the day, now felt empty and foreboding. The only light came from the dim glow of the windows, casting eerie shadows on the ground. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl or the distant howl of a coyote. Soft at first, like the rustle of paper, it was almost imperceptible, a faint whisper that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Emma strained her ears, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound, but it eluded her. It seemed to be coming from the walls. The old wooden beams creaked and groaned, as if they were alive, whispering secrets from the past. The shadows danced on the walls, creating shapes that seemed to move and shift with a life of their own. Emma dismissed it as mice. She had seen a few scurrying about during the day and assumed they were the culprits. She tried to convince herself that it was nothing more than the natural sounds of an old house settling. But as the night wore on, the rustling grew louder, more insistent. It was no longer just a faint whisper, but a persistent noise that seemed to be getting closer. Emma's heart began to race, and she felt a cold sweat break out on her forehead. It was then that she heard it, a whisper, faint but distinct. Her heart raced. The words were unintelligible, but the tone was unmistakable. It was a voice, and it was speaking to her. She felt a chill run down her spine, and her breath caught in her throat. She told herself it was just the wind, but deep down a seed of fear had been planted. Sleep was impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she could hear the whispering growing louder and more insistent. She tossed and turned, her mind racing with thoughts of what could be causing the noise. Every creak of the floorboards, every sigh of the wind sounded like footsteps and whispers. The house seemed to be alive, and it was watching her. She felt a constant sense of dread, as if something was lurking just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. By morning she was exhausted, her nerves frayed. The once peaceful farmhouse had become a place of fear and uncertainty. She knew she couldn't go on like this, but she didn't know what to do. The whispers had taken hold of her mind, and she feared they would never let go. Determined to find a logical explanation for the noises, Emma began to investigate. She checked the attic, finding nothing but dust and cobwebs. She inspected the walls, tapping on them for any hollow spaces. It was in the basement that she found her first clue. The basement was dark and damp, the air thick with the smell of mildew. As Emma shone her flashlight around, she noticed strange markings on the wall. They were scratches, deep and jagged, as if someone had clawed at the stone in desperation. The scratches were clustered together, forming what looked like a crude message. Emma traced the lines with her fingers, her heart pounding in her chest. What had happened here? Who or what had made these marks? She tried to decipher the message, but the scratches were too deep, too frantic. It was like trying to read the scribbles of a terrified mind.